What's up, Periscope? How's everybody doing tonight? We are live now for Bible Basics class right here on the wonderful medium of Periscope. See you guys trickling in, of course, as you're coming in. Make sure you're swiping to the right, letting your followers know that you are in Bible study tonight on Periscope. We want to fill the room up with everybody coming in to Bible study tonight. We're going to have a great time going through the book of Jeremiah. So, of course, as you come in, make sure you let me know where you're watching from. If you're in Baltimore or you're somewhere else, let me know. Shout out to church. Anybody else you want to shout out, send them a shout out to. But we're going to have a good time on Periscope tonight. I'm going in on all my pages and making sure I'm sharing it to have the word out to everybody. All right, from Bus 52. All right, Harrisburg, PA, Laurel, Maryland, New Psalms member. Glad to have you on with us. We're going to have a good time. It's a lot going on in the world. Not going to keep you guys long tonight. You know, Empire comes on. Hey, Deja, hope all is well. The Empire comes on tonight, Dolores. But also one of my new favorite shows, Designated Survivor, comes on tonight too. So that's not till 10. So I'll get y'all off in good time so you can watch that show. Fresh Fire, amen. Oh, yes. Fresh Fire is coming up soon at New Psalms. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. All right, from First Baptist, glad you're on with us. We got some other New Psalmist members. I see you guys jumping on in here. Of course, y'all know how it goes. I need y'all to share from Tampa. All righty, New Psalmist. Hey, Stasia, right from Tampa, Florida, down there. How'd you make out with all the hurricane and everything coming through there? Make sure you write back. I just realized you gotta talk so you get back. But yeah, Stage is watching down from Tampa, Florida. Down there, it's a little. Oh, good. It didn't get y'all. Perfect. Yeah, it was a mess. My wife was actually going down to Florida with some of her friends, but they canceled all the trips and everything because it got too bad. So the good thing is though, nobody that I know. Hopefully everybody who was there in the fire, they were able to get out to safety. And it didn't impact them. But of course, we are praying for all of those who did experience some loss, especially our brothers and sisters in the country of Haiti, as well as the Bahamas. And that New Psalmist will be raising a special offering for that on Sunday. Hey, from Baltimore, New Psalmist member. Alrighty, I see you. Glad you're in with us. So y'all know how it goes. So I need y'all. We're doing tonight. We're going on Jeremiah. Well, we can't start until we get 100 people in the room. So I need y'all to swipe to the right, share this to everybody, all your followers on Periscope, on Twitter, Instagram, everything. I'm sharing it on all my pages right now because we need to make sure everybody is in here tonight. All right, First Baptist Church of Highland Park, down there, Pastor Henry Davis. You're getting ready for moving to a new building, and definitely praising God with you guys, moving in and seeing what God has done down there. It's going to be exciting. I know it's not too far from now. It's going to be a great time. So yes, make sure you guys are swiping, letting everybody know that you are watching right now on Periscope on October 29th. Okay, in just a couple of weeks. That'll be here. I know it's going to be a great time down there. So swiping, make sure you're sharing it to everybody. Okay, I see the people, the room numbers are going up a little bit. So we doing good. I'm sharing it right now on my other pages. I'm gonna share it on our Facebook page for the Millennial Ministry, so that it's out there and the world knows that we are in Bible study tonight. Got some exciting stuff, some things going on. I want to make sure you guys know about it. So, but I got to get 100 people in the room before I can do it. So, hey, how you doing? It's been so much going on this past Sunday at New Psalmist. We had great worship, gearing up for Fresh Fire that is coming in just a few weeks. We're just about 6 weeks or so away from Fresh Fire, November 29th, November 30th, and December the 1st. It is going to be a life-changing encounter at the New Psalmist Baptist Church. Dr. Charles Booth from Columbus, Ohio. And, praise God, yeah, we had a good time there. I preached this past Sunday talking about Fresh Fire because, we are believing that Fresh Fire is coming. You have to believe that God has something more in store for you. It's a shame when people just say, well, God's doing something and I'm just chilling where I'm at. But the thing I've learned is that God is always up to something new. God always has something in store for you. And because of that, you have to continue to stay connected to him and continue to prepare yourself to receive the fresh fire. So, we are believing that God is going to send fresh fire to New Psalmist, and he's going to send it to each and every one of us. And I'm believing by faith that it's going to start in the fresh fire experience at New Psalmist November 29th, November 30th, and December the 1st. So if you're in Baltimore, in the area, make sure you are ready and in the place for fresh fire. If you are from around Baltimore or not local, you can stream us, but I'd even encourage you to try to make it to Baltimore for one of those 3 nights. It's going to be a great time because God is going to do something great, and it's going to start in the Fresh Fire experience. If you're coming to Fresh Fire, just tap the screen. I want to see the hearts of everybody who's going to be at Fresh Fire, because I want to make sure y'all going to be there. Y'all watch me on Periscope, so I hope to see y'all in the place. My Periscope audience, Periscope congregation has to be in the place, yes. Oh, wonderful. Deja going to be up in the choir. So we're going to get you a solo. Deja, you're going to sing a solo. She told me last time that she was about to never talk to me again because I said we were going to have her sing a solo. But we're going to get Deja to sing a solo for Fresh Fire. Amen. And we believe in it. We claiming it now. But God, it's going to be a fun time at New Psalmist. All right. So it looks like we got, from my iPad, I'm looking at the total. We got 123 people in the room, so we'll go ahead and get started. If you missed, worship at New Psalmist Sunday, you can watch it online. Go to newpsalmist.org, click on the media tab. You can watch all the services from this past Sunday. You can even subscribe to our on-demand network. It's like our New Psalmist Netflix, where we have over 300 different videos in there. You can go to mpbc.tv from a computer, or you can download the MPBC TV app right on your phone, sign up for a free account, and get all the services that are in there. So much content. I know it'll be a blessing to your life. Alrighty. So, thanks, Will. You're so kind. You're so kind. So, let's go ahead and get rolling. So, if this is your first time watching us, I am Reverend Joshua Thomas from the New Psalmist Baptist Church. I am the Director of Media as well as the Millennial Ministry Leader, where Bishop Walter Scott Thomas Sr. is the pastor right here in the wonderful city of Baltimore, Maryland. So I encourage you, if you're in the Baltimore metropolitan area, definitely come check us out. We're in the Seton Business Park. You can look us up online, newpsalmist.org. Check us out for more information. And this class, Bible Basics class, is just that. It's a basic Bible study that we are moving through the entire Bible. We have made great progress. We are now in the books of the prophets. Today we are looking at the book of Jeremiah, and we're going to kick off in just one moment. But before we start, I want to make sure that everybody knows about M2 worship this Friday at New Psalmist. Yes, Pastor Marquise Johns, he shared with us in the KCP conference, and we were actually right up at North Philadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church a couple of weeks ago. Bishop preached up there on the 24th, I believe, it was last Saturday in the month of September. Great time, great peoples. Marquise is Dr. Johns is a great friend of mine. He's a very cool guy. He helps me out with a lot of stuff for Millennial Ministry. So that's cool. That's one of his specialties, looking at generational ministry. So this Friday at New Psalmist, M2 worship, 7:30 at the church is this is a time of millennial worship. It's an experience that's just for us. I believe by faith that it's going to be a transformative evening. We are starting a new sermon series in M2 worship entitled Get Out of There. One of the things I've seen and talking with a lot of my friends and seeing a lot of the stuff that many millennials are dealing with is that, it's tough to be a Christian in this world where everything in the world, from our society to our culture and our communities, is really designed to take you away from God, whether it's getting you caught up in material possessions, caught up in the social scene, trying to be the socialite, having the cool post on Instagram, having a following on social media, having the bling and all of that stuff. And it makes it tough trying to live according to God's word, but knowing that that's what the society and the culture is really geared and trying to shift you towards. So this Friday, we're going to kick off the series entitled Get Me Out of There, because we know we don't want to get trapped in all of that stuff. God has so much in store for us, and we don't want to lose it or forfeit it because we got too caught up in trying to live a life that was pleasing to the world. So we're going to start looking at a story in the Old Testament at the end of the book of Genesis. You guys who've been in Bible study remember the story of the famine in all of the land. And Joseph, who was in Egypt at the time, had received high place in the king's and Pharaoh's court because he interpreted dreams, told him that the famine was coming after the years of harvest. They stored up. They had a lot of stuff, so they were able to live through the famine. And all of his brothers and father Jacob were back in Canaan, and they were dealing with the famine. They did not have resources. They were using everything up. They heard that there were great resources in Egypt, so they went to Egypt to get the resources so that they could survive through the famine. However, this text tells us that they were so enamored with Egypt, they were treated like kings and queens. They were given anything they wanted because of Joseph. Joseph was at a high place. He was over everything in all of Egypt. And because of that, he bestowed those same privileges upon his family. And they got all the best of everything that they could get. But God had given them a promised land. They went to Egypt for the famine, but because they got so caught up in the royalty, got so caught up in the possessions, the nice things, they got trapped there and they did not go back home. Fast forward to Exodus. There arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and he put all of Joseph's descendants in slavery. Had they gone back home, they would have never become slaves. And how many of us as millennials are living a life where we've fallen into the trap that Jacob and his sons fell into? They saw the nice things in Egypt, and instead of going back home, they made a life there. That life will always lead to slavery. So it's important now we understand how to get out of there, how to get out of Egypt, get to where God has promised us, the land that God has for us, and trust God to build us up and sustain us there. So that's what we're going to talk about this Friday. If you're excited about hearing that series, I want you to just tap the screen, send up the hearts. I want to make sure we on the right track with where we're going, because our quest at New Psalmist is that we are relevant. We're not trying to do ministry just to be doing it. No, we're trying to do relevant ministry that ministers to people where they are. And it's the same thing in millennial ministry. We don't want to just have stuff to say we're doing it. No, we want to do things and do ministry that ministers to millennials where they are, so it helps them to understand the power of Jesus Christ in their lives and how they can manifest it even in this millennial demographic. Because I truly believe that even as millennials, that does not mean we have to wait till we get older to be able to walk into what it is God has for us. But we can start it now, and God is calling for us to start it now. And in order to start it now, we got to make sure we don't get caught up in the trap of trying to live that other life and not living the life that God has called us to live. So we're going to talk about that this Friday, 7:30 at the New Psalmist Baptist Church. I encourage you to go to our Facebook group. You can go to Facebook. Just search the group M2NPBC, M2NPBC. Or if you're in a browser, you can type in facebook.com/M2NPBC. You'll see the event. Just RSVP to the event. You don't have to RSVP, but RSVP, that way all your friends will see it. You can share it on your timeline. But we want to pack the chapel out of millennials who are serious about seeing how they can live a life that is pleasing in God's sight. Because we all want to live a life that's pleasing in God's sight. And I believe God is calling us to that life. And into worship on this Friday, we're going to start taking the first steps to living that life. So I hope to see you at New Psalmist on Friday. So that's all our announcements. So let's jump into our lesson. Today we're going over Jeremiah. Once again, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, the Old Testament and New Testament are broken into categories. We have the Old Testament, 39 books, New Testament, 27 books. And in the Old Testament, we have the books of law, the books of history, the books of wisdom and poetry, the books of the major prophets and the minor prophets. We've gone through the law, the history, the wisdom and poetry, and now we are at the prophets. If you've missed any of the sessions, you can go to my YouTube channel. That's just search Bible Basics, Joshua Thomas on YouTube. You'll see it. You can see all the lessons to catch you up to see anything you may have missed. And last week we looked at Isaiah. You'll remember Isaiah is the first book of the prophets that we have in the Old Testament. And Isaiah is broken down into three categories. First Isaiah, second Isaiah, third Isaiah. Isaiah to Jerusalem, Isaiah to the exiles, Isaiah to the reconstruction. the three delineations in the book of Isaiah, and is believed to have compiled over a 200-year period, spanning pre-exile to exile and then return back after exile. So that's Isaiah. And now we're looking at Jeremiah. So let me give you a little introduction onto the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a prophet to Judah. So once again, like Isaiah, he is a prophet to the southern kingdom, that is the kingdom of Judah. Jeremiah comes to power, comes to his prophetic calling in around the end of the 600s, so about 627 is often ascribed as the date that he enters into the prophetic ministry, so to say. So that's you know that's after the northern kingdoms have been destroyed. He is from the lineage of Abiathar, possibly from the lineage of Abiathar, who is a prophet, who was the priest in Jerusalem. Those of you who remember, as we were looking through in the beginning of 1 Kings, when David was transitioning out and his son Solomon was coming, when he was putting his son Solomon to the throne, there was another one of David's sons, Adonijah, who originally was laying claim to the throne, and he had backing him a priest by the name of Abiathar. But Solomon had backing him a priest by the name of Zadok. So obviously the priest that was backing Abiathar was banished from Jerusalem and put up in the area of the Benjamites, of Benjamin, the area of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. Jeremiah is from that area, and is believed that Jeremiah is in this lineage of Abiathar, a priest who has been disgraced, kicked out, so to say, of the priestly class in Jerusalem. He was kicked out of the priestly class in Jerusalem, which is where the temple was. So that's a critical distinction to remember, because that's going to start to shape some of the story as we go along, looking at why Jeremiah is where he is, and possibly influence why he cannot share this message in a way that's received by many, knowing some of this backstory. So he was denied privilege to minister in the temple because he's not a Jerusalem priest. Remember, the priests in Jerusalem had the privilege to minister in the temple, which was in Jerusalem. But those not from Jerusalem did not just get bestowed upon them the privilege to minister in this temple. So that's a critical thing to understand, that Jeremiah does not have the right to just go into the temple and minister as a priest in this way, shape, and form. And also that begins to shape some of the interactions that we get a little later. And it's often believed that this is possibly because of his connection to Abiathar. So that whole line coming out of Abiathar, none of them were able to minister as priests because of what happened. So Jeremiah's call narrative that we find in the first chapter of Jeremiah is very interesting. Remember last week when we looked at Isaiah, we looked at his call narrative in the divine council. Isaiah chapter 6. He saw the Lord high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. And he said, "Who can I send?" And Isaiah said, "Here I am, send me." So that we saw that call narrative of in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. So we see a call narrative. One of the things that you'll constantly hear as we look at all the prophets are call narratives. Call narrative, for those of you who may not know what that is, all it is essentially the time in which the prophet or the priest or whoever heard from God that God was giving them this assignment and accepted it. That's all a call narrative is that it's the calling of God to do an assignment, to take on this new calling. The religious talk, essentially just when God gave them the assignment at what point. Jeremiah's call narrative is one that many of you have probably heard before. God says to him, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." So God tells Jeremiah that this has already been before he was born. This was his calling, to be a prophet to the nations. It goes on to talk about how Jeremiah will have an interesting assignment, that he's being called to be a prophet to tear down and to build up. What that means, and is kind of setting up Jeremiah's ministry, is that part of Jeremiah's calling will be to talk about destruction that's coming, and also to talk about restoration. So he's going to talk about destruction and talk about restoration. as you can imagine, having to talk about destruction puts you in a difficult position because of what's going to happen. It's tough to have a message talking about destruction. It's not safe for a prophet to go in and say, you're going to be destroyed. Because as you can imagine, he's going to a king, telling the king that he's going to be destroyed. A king don't want to always hear that. So it's a difficult assignment. It's a dangerous assignment, a life-threatening assignment. But Jeremiah has been called to preach destruction and to also talk about restoration. So those are two critical things that we have in Jeremiah chapter 1 that we really begins to set the tone for what's coming. So let's look at the context with which Jeremiah is called to be a prophet in. He rises, as I stated, as a prophet in the 620s BC. So 627 is often ascribed as his entrance into the prophetic ministry. So that's when he rises. Israel is gone, is wiped away. The Assyrians are in the north. But the Assyrian power has begun to weaken. So remember, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom in 722. They were trying to besiege Judah in around 701, but they were unsuccessful in fully overthrowing Judah, the southern kingdom. So, but because of that, they had political oppression on them. So they were like a city-state, so to say, to use some of our understanding now, where there was political influence from Assyria, from the Assyrians who had conquered the north, that they were pushing down into Judah because they had more strength, more military power, so they kind of had to go along with it. They had to worship some of the Assyrian gods to keep the peace so that they were still able to operate as a quasi-free nation, though they were still, the political influences from the north, the Assyrian nations, did have some rank and kind of dictated in ways what was happening in Israel because of their protection. They were so close they could overtake them. So that's how that was connection. So treaties and, you got to do what you got to do to survive. But as we get to the mid of the 600 BCs, as we get to the middle of that area, the Assyrian power is going lower and lower. They're losing strength. They are becoming weaker and weaker. It's a theme. Anybody who has studied world history knows that every empire has its ups, but then it has a down. And as you expand more, the Assyrians were conquering everybody. But because they were doing so much, it often led to many insurrections within their military, different people on different pages, which leads to the decline of an empire. Excuse me. So around this time that Jeremiah is coming to his ministry, this prophetic ministry, they have more independence now. And they're able to be a little bit more free, and they have the ability to kind of go back to some of the old ways because they don't have to worship some of the other gods, the gods of the Assyrians, as they had to before. So he's rising. But something interesting happens. Josiah was the king when Jeremiah begins his career. Excuse me, I'm still fighting through a little cold. So Josiah is the king, and those of you who've been with us remember Josiah, as we learned in 2 Kings, is also the king that finds, under his reign, they find the book of the law in the temple. And when they find the book of the law in the temple, they rededicate their lives. They reconnect to God. Jeremiah is a prophet during this time. So they've reconnected to God. Before they have kind of gone back to God, Jeremiah talks about, a lot of things. He kind of is more on the social justice side of things. But in 622 is when it's believed that Josiah, they lead the rededication and the reformation, going back to the religion and the way that God instructed them and given through the book of the law, which is said in 2 Kings, which is often believed to have been the book of Deuteronomy. Now Jeremiah does not have to say as much, so there's a period of silence. So because they've led a reformation, so Jeremiah is a prophet. He's called to bring the word of the Lord. But now that the people are living in right relationship to God and have led this rededication, this religious reformation, cleaning out those high places, getting rid of those other gods, Jeremiah goes silent. We don't have anything from him for a period of about 10 years or so, because the people are living right. And the leadership, the kingdom, the one on the throne, Josiah, has led them to live right. But, as you know, as we studied, and as you have, and I'm sure you guys remember from our lessons going through the Deuteronomic historians' works, it did not last forever. Josiah dies in battle. And then there's a series of kings that come to the throne. Jehoiakim comes, and Jehoiakim was king from 609 to 598 BC. And as you can guess, Jehoiakim does not keep the Reformation up. Jehoiakim goes back, brings in other gods, brings all of that stuff back, does not follow the same Reformation that Josiah had led, turning them back to the law, to the right relationship and religious observance as they had been instructed by God. And that's when Jeremiah really comes back to prominence, his voice, and that's where we really pick up the meat and the bulk of what we have in Jeremiah. So I want to look at a couple of key things in the book of Jeremiah. I want to look at first what's known as the Temple Sermon. This is found, if you're taking notes, this is found in chapter 7 of Jeremiah. We find it in chapter 7 and also an account of it in chapter 26. So that's chapter 7 and chapter 26. We have an account of what we call is the Temple Sermon. And it's a message that Jeremiah preached outside in the temple area in Jerusalem. Remember, he's not a prophet in Jerusalem. He's not a priest in Jerusalem, rather. But he preaches this in Jerusalem. And you're going to love the message he preaches. He tells of doom and destruction that's coming because they aren't living right. So he goes into Jerusalem. He's not a priest in Jerusalem. He has no authority in Jerusalem. He goes in Jerusalem and he preaches telling of doom and destruction that's destined to come to Jerusalem. And this is where it gets interesting, and this is where we start to see some of the religious understanding and really some cultural things start to clash. Because Jeremiah preaches, and in this sermon I encourage you to read it through chapter 7 and then read in chapter 26 where you see a lot of the context that's going on around it. 7 for the sermon itself, 26 for the context and the fallout. He talks about how it's the Judeans, those in Judah, have used an understanding of their security as saying, well, since the temple is here, we will always be all right. So since the temple is here, we'll always be all right. That's what they understood, those in Judah. That's how they acted. So no matter what they did, no matter how far they went away from God, they had this superstitious almost belief that no matter what they did, they would never be destroyed. Jerusalem would never be overthrown because the temple was there. And then their theology, they understood the temple as the physical presence of God on earth. So Jeremiah stands to preach and say, y'all gonna be destroyed. Y'all gonna be wiped out. And it doesn't matter that you got the temple here, because the temple is not going to save you because you're living in an immoral way. You aren't doing what God called you to do. You're not following his commands. You aren't following his instructions. As you can understand, this was not met with much reception. He stands up and preaches this, and he stresses the importance on trusting God and following God's commands and living right versus just the temple. He backs it up talking about Shiloh, where the tent of meeting was back in the days of Eli and Samuel, and how Shiloh had been destroyed. So that shows that God's not going to spare Jerusalem just because the temple's there, but you got to live right and follow his commands, and that's what gives you the protection of God. So this really starts to plant some seeds. As you know, we've seen this thread really start to evolve after we've gone through the books of really up to the exile. Before the exile, we saw the thread of you are religious by how you worship in the temple. You sacrifice. You pray at certain times in certain ways at the temple. Everything you do at the temple is what defines you as a quote-unquote good believer. But we're starting to see how seeds are being sown to say religious observance is nice, Religious observance is a command that God has given us. But what really defines you and ranks you, so to say, on your journey, on your spiritual journey and connection and relationship with God is a personal faith, personal understanding and practice, not just in the temple, but in your everyday life, in your character, becoming the person that God called you to be. So we start to see this. Remember last week we saw some threads in Isaiah as there was a character sketch that started to go up in Isaiah. At the close of Isaiah, we see how it's important to have faith and believe. Jeremiah is telling it on the front end before the destruction of the temple, saying it's not about the temple, the presence of God. Yes, but you got to have this in your heart. You got to have faith. And we use faith so that it makes the clear connection. You got to trust and follow God's commands and live right. It's not just about the temple. You can't have the temple here and worship other gods and still expect God to honor that. But no, you have to, just because the temple's here, you also have to have it in your heart, that God is in your heart. And that is what protects you. There you go, Mr. Doug. That's the best way to put it. Relationship versus ritual. We see a movement away from relationship to ritual. From ritual to relationship, rather. So that's something, we'll see that over and over. And that really begins to set the foundation for where Jesus' ministry picks up in the New Testament. And how he talks about he's the completion. We've seen this journey. But now it's not just about observing the Sabbath. If somebody needs to be healed, heal them. So we start to see this stuff. But these are the seeds. That's why it's important you understand this foundation. Because it builds off of this. So now when you're looking in the New Testament and you see the context with why some really fought against Jesus, because he was essentially living the practice that it ain't about just the temple. It ain't just about observance to the letter of the law. It's about the heart and the faith. And that's why they were fighting against it, just like they're fighting against Jeremiah and the same thing. So you start to see how some of this stuff works together. So the priests pressed for Jeremiah to be killed because of this message. Think about this. The priests make their living, their livelihood on people coming to the temple in such a way and having that connection solely through the temple, because only in the temple can you connect with God. Remember when the kingdom split, they built a temple up in Dan because they didn't want all of the people going back down to Jerusalem to worship. They said, no, I got to have my own temple up here so that my folk ain't got to leave the northern kingdom to go down to worship. So they built the temple up there because of this. So these priests say, no, this ain't right. You ain't, this is against the teaching. This is against everything. They pressed for him to be killed. But there was some precedents that said prophets in this manner were not killed for their actions. So that's how Jeremiah's life is spared. And he's not killed because of this. So it's important you start to see he's called to tear down and build up. Being called to tear down means you're gonna disrupt some folk. You're gonna shake some stuff up. You're gonna be a challenge. People are gonna see you as a challenge. You're gonna be a disruption. So it's critical. And one thing to always think about, the word of God has never just simply come to comply with what's going on in the world. But the word of God comes and God sends fresh revelation to disrupt stuff, to challenge things. Because whenever people aren't living right and are living with a faith in God and practicing and the right and observing properly and really trusting and believing in God, there's always destruction that will come. So the word of the prophet, the job of the prophet is to share that message, to say the way you're living is going to lead you to this. So it's critical to always remember that's the role of the prophet. He was called to tear down and build up. But tearing down means you got to say this ain't right. But when you do that, you make some enemies. Critical distinction. So another place where Jeremiah makes some enemies, we're going to jump to what was called as the temple scroll. The scroll, rather, that Jeremiah gives. This is you can find this if you're taking notes. I want you to write this one down. Remember, this is a Bible basics class. We're not going to dig into every single line in the book of Jeremiah, but I want to pull out a couple of themes that'll really help you to understand the context and really give you an understanding for what happens in this book. So chapter 36, we find a story where Jeremiah writes down the scroll, dictates his prophecies, what's coming, what's going to happen, and he gives it to his scribe, Baruch, to write it down and put it on the scroll and then take it to the temple. So you do this. Baruch takes it to the temple and he reads it in the courts. Some people are receptive to it, but they say you might not want to read this to the king because the king ain't going to want to hear this and it may not turn out good for you. So he heeds to their advice. It gets taken to the king and read for the king. And when the king hears it, every time he hears a column or so, takes the knife, cuts the scroll that of the columns that just been written, puts it in the fire. He's in his winter home. It's cold, so he's got a fire by him. He cuts it, takes the paper that he cut off that just been written in his hearing, puts it in the fire, burns it up. Does that for the entire scroll. That's talking about the destruction, talking about how they need to turn their hearts back to God or they're going to be destroyed. And the king, Jehoiakim, cuts it all up, burns the whole scroll. So word gets back to Jeremiah that this is what happens. So Jeremiah says, all right, king, that's how you're going to play it. So Jeremiah takes Baruch again, dictates everything to him again. And this time he even adds some more stuff. And that scroll is not given to the king, so it's preserved. But part of this also, this story, what most scholars believe, that this second scroll is the scroll that makes up the majority of the book of Jeremiah. So this second scroll that Jeremiah has dictated again the prophecies, his visions on what's going to happen. This makes up the bulk of what we find now as the book of Jeremiah. So that's a critical thing to understand. So what that also shows us is that Jeremiah himself most likely did not write the book, but he dictated the book. It's an oral tradition. We've seen that throughout history, that an author may not have physically written it, but he spoke it, and orally someone transcribed it for him. And that's most likely what we have here in the book of Jeremiah. So that scroll is critical that you understand it and understand the story behind it, that the king, once again, completely disregarded what Jeremiah was saying. The king said, okay, yeah, later, I'm burning what you said. I'm not taking heed to it. I'm not doing anything differently. I'm not going to turn my heart back to God or anything. I'm going to throw it away and not even take it seriously. So it shows you the reception that Jeremiah was getting. Now, this is the third move I'm going to show you, and then and we'll wrap us up. You can imagine that someone who has to share a message of destruction like this, like Jeremiah, who is constantly, we've seen an incident where the priests were trying to have him killed for his visions. The king completely disregarded everything he said and even wanted to find him to kill him, but Jeremiah was in hiding, so he didn't find him. Every time he shares a message of destruction, he's not received well. He also has family history and lineage that are causing him to be inferior to some people because he's coming from the line of Abiathar. So that with it carries a negative connotation because they sided with Adonijah and not Solomon. So all of those forces against him. He can't minister in the temple because he's not a priest in Jerusalem. All of that, you can imagine, weighed on him. And that created a narrative which we call Jeremiah's complaint. If you're taking those, write that down. Jeremiah's complaint. Throughout the chapters, mostly chapters 11 through 20, we have stories of Jeremiah's complaints. Excuse me. And this is Jeremiah expressing his feelings of sadness and of hurt, of uncertainty about what he's dealing with to God. Jeremiah has open dialogue with God saying, God, why are you doing this to me? In some instances, some cases, he believes that those he's prophesying against that haven't been living right, that they're given the upper hand against him. That every time he tries to do it, they're given the upper hand. They're able to get away with it. They're able to have so much more success. And Jeremiah is like, this ain't right, God. Like, why is this happening to me? One of the most famous ones that we find, one of Jeremiah's most, yes, the weeping prophet. As I mentioned last week, that is Jeremiah has, in the text, we find more of his personality come out than perhaps any other person almost in the entire Bible, outside of possibly David or Moses, or maybe even to an extent Abraham. Jeremiah, we find more of his personality coming out almost than any other character in the entire Bible through these complaints. So one of the most famous complaints is found in chapter 20. And Jeremiah had been given an assignment to give a message, and the prophet, and he was beaten because of his message. He was beaten at the temple. He was beaten, and he was put in captivity for a night. And Jeremiah, immediately following that, right, starting beginning in verse 7 in Jeremiah 20, he starts saying, "O Lord, you have deceived me, and I was deceived. You overpowered me and prevailed. I am ridiculed all day long. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I cry out, proclaiming violence and destruction. So the word of the Lord has brought me insult and reproach all day long." That's some real stuff. Jeremiah's having an honest conversation with God, saying, God, I'm doing what you called me to do, and it's getting me, people laughing at me, people mocking me, they ridiculing me. I'm being beaten. I'm having to pay a price, a heavy price, to do what you called me to do. This ain't right. But some of you may remember when we went through the book of Psalms, we looked at complaint psalms. And complaint psalms shared a complaint about a condition, about what was happening at a certain time. But they didn't stop at just a complaint. It also tied a bow back on it and brought it back around. And that's the same type of literary motif we see here. Because this is where many of you will have heard this when we get to now verse 9. He's saying, I'm facing insult and reproach all day long. Verse 9. But if I say I will not mention him or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. Somebody saying, I didn't heard that. That's where it's from. Exactly. So we see this narrative. Yes, they're complaint psalms. So that was one of the types. We have the worship psalms, where it's worshiping God and adoration, the hymn psalms, and then we have complaint psalms. If you missed that, if anybody needs a refresher on that, that one's on the YouTube channel. I encourage you to go watch it to talk as we talked about all those different types of psalms of the Psalter that we have in Psalms. But we see this complaint motif here where Jeremiah is talking about how bad it is. He's upset. He's furious. He's mad at God. But then he also pulls it back. He says, yeah, I'm mad. I'm upset. But, if I hold on to it, it's like a fire. And I'm going to eventually talk about it again because this is what I'm called to do. And this is what's in me. So it's going to come out. I'm mad right now, God. But, this is what it is. I'm human. And we see that here. And it really begins a motif that we see even today, that while it shows us that it's okay to have these honest conversations with God. It's okay to really express to God how you feel, why you might not be happy in a situation, but also how to turn it back around and say, yeah, but I'm still going to do what you called me to do because that is what you put me here for. Before I was formed in my mother's womb, you made me to be this prophet who was going to preach about tearing stuff down and building stuff up. So this is what I got to go through. But the other side of that is this. His message was to preach about destruction. But the other side of that is to preach about building back up and restoration. So finally, Jeremiah talks about a new covenant when he writes a letter to the exiles. Remember, they were taken away from Jerusalem in two waves. First wave began around 598 BC. And they still kind of had it was basically a king that had been put in, and they were still existing under the rule of the Babylonians, but they still kind of had their land. They had the temple and all. Some had been taken, but the rest of them were there. Jehoiachin and all of them had gone, but some were still in Jerusalem. So Jeremiah pens a letter to those in exile. And that's found in chapter 29. And I'm going to close on this one. Somebody at the beginning of this lesson wrote up their favorite scripture was Jeremiah 29:11. Jeremiah chapter 29 is Jeremiah's letter to the exiles. And in the letter to the exiles, he reassures them that there will be a return to the homeland, which is the land of promise. Remember, return to the homeland always signifies the return to the land that God promised them, because that is the promise, the covenant God made with Abraham. So that's why we see even today, really, not to go too far off, but we see the importance and the significance to Jews of the land of Israel, because that is the land of promise. And they're saying this is the land that God promised to give to them. So he assures them that there will be a return. And as we go into chapter 30 through chapter 33, we see a new covenant. And in this new covenant, he adds, now not only will God cover them and protect them and everything, but now he says that God will forgive you when you fall short, and he will wipe your sins out. So for the first time, we have in covenant conversation, discussion. Now we have room for some things that are going to show up full blast in the New Testament. Many of you know them as grace and mercy. We start to see now for the first time in a covenant and covenantal relationship with God, the place for grace and mercy explicitly. Because remember, up until this point, if he promises to Abraham, he says, if your people, if your descendants will always keep me first, honor me, trust me, I will cover them and always protect them. That's been the covenant. But now, for the first time, and we see it here in Jeremiah, chapters 30 through 33, really starting at 29, right on through 33, we have room in the covenant for grace and mercy. For Jeremiah saying, God says, if you mess up, then I will forgive you and I will wipe your sins out. So this is something new that we're starting to see, and I can't stress this enough, that it's important that you understand this foundation. Because now the message that Jesus comes sharing in form, it's a new message. He is a new messenger. But that's why Jesus never says, I come to abolish anything, because he's building off of this. That's why it's so critical you understand it, because if you don't understand it, you don't understand the context that Jesus is building off of. But because all of this groundwork is starting to be laid, Jesus is coming into the world and using all of this and saying, I am the fulfillment of it all. So that is Jeremiah. Next week we'll go over Ezekiel. But that is the book of Jeremiah. I encourage you to go back and look through it. There's so many different narratives in here where we see Jeremiah. As we remember, we start off 1 through 6 or so, chapters 1 through 6, and give us Jeremiah before the Reformation under Josiah. Then much of the remainder of the book is prophecies about what's going to happen, impending instruction, because they have now turned away from the reform. And we also give great understanding and see into Jeremiah's character and see into what was going through his mind that humanizes him. Saying, he got a difficult job to stand up in the temple and say, the way y'all been worshiping and the way y'all been acting ain't right, and y'all gonna be destroyed unless you get it right. And this temple here is nice. You got great riches, but it's all gonna be gone, and God ain't gonna save you just because the temple here don't mean you safe. But no, y'all ain't living right, so y'all gonna be destroyed. He was struggling with that message, saying, God, I'm doing what you called me to do, and they ridiculing me, they talking about me, they trying to kill me, they stoning me, they flagging me, they beat me up. But it's like a fire shut in my bones. So I'm going to do it because this is what you called me to do. So that's Jeremiah. If you were blessed today, double tap the screen, send up those hearts. I want to make sure that this lesson was on point, that you guys learned more about Jeremiah. If you were blessed, send in an emoji with your hands up, with the hand up, or another emoji, praying hands, clapping hands, whatever emoji you want to send in, or to use the official term, whatever emoticon you want to have lifted on this Periscope, send it in. I want to make sure you guys are being blessed. As I mentioned, each and every week, I enjoy going back through these books, just studying, preparing for the lesson. There's so much there to learn. And there's so much in the prophets when you really dig into, especially the major prophets. which are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. The major prophets show us so much of really rehashing some of the history we learned in the books of history, giving us some new details and understanding from a cultural perspective, from a prophet's point of view, that help us to see what's going on, put things into the right context. And we saw how the destruction it was a kind of a cycle, the Deuteronomic cycle. You do right, turn back to God, he bless you, turn away, destruction come. And we see it now from the prophet's perspective, where the prophet is preaching, you got to get right. You got to get right. You got to get right. But the people didn't adhere to the words of the prophet. And because they didn't adhere to the words of the prophet, destruction came to them. So, once again, don't forget, this Friday night, New Psalmist Baptist Church, M2 Worship. 1 hour service. We are starting the series, Get Out of There, looking at what God has in store for us as millennials and how we have to make sure we don't get trapped into living the life of the world and trapped to the glitz and the glam, the high life, the social life, trying to be the it boy, the it man, the it woman, whatever. But God has greater in store for us. So I hope to see you Friday at New Psalmist 7:30. Don't forget, follow me right here on Periscope on everything at Rev J Thomas, at REVJ Thomas. I hope to see you guys. I will post more information on everything and RSVP for the event right on New Psalmist. Just search M2 NPBC. Check out the group. Check out the event. So see you guys Friday. Till next week. We'll be back on here, same time, same location, on going through the book of Ezekiel. And I'll see y'all on Friday. So y'all be blessed.